Think of all the monasteries that dot this island of ours, and think of all the precious books they had in their libraries, nearly all lost, except for a precious handful. This monastery was never one of the major monasteries of Ireland. It was never in the league of places like Clonmacnoise or Glendalough, but it was home for several centuries to one of the most precious of surviving Irish manuscripts, the Book of Leinster. We're here in Oughaval in County Laois. It's a very old monastery, but in the 6th century, of course, it was very new, and its name then, on Oughaval, means the new foundation. It was hundreds of years later that the manuscript now known as the Book of Leinster was written, sometime in the 12th century. We don't know exactly where it was written, although one of its main scribes was Éadó Crifton, the abbot of Terryglass in what is now County Tipperary. We do know, though, that from at least the 14th century, the book was known as Lever na Nuachongvala, the Book of Oughaval. It was owned by whatever community was here, and we know from notes in other manuscripts that it was being actively copied by other monasteries, and maybe even loaned out to other monasteries, until all the monasteries were suppressed. And this great book ended up in the hands of the O'Moores, the local bigwigs, who preserved it for another few hundred years, before it ended up in the possession of Trinity College Dublin and gained a new name, the Book of Leinster. Now, every monastery in Ireland, along with monasteries throughout the Christian world, would have had manuscripts containing books of the Bible and saints' lives and canon law and liturgical books with texts and instructions for worship. But the Book of Leinster is another kind of book altogether. It's a very diverse compilation of texts, almost all written in the Irish language. It contains some classic works of Irish literature, most famous of them all being the Táin Bó Cúailnge, which we looked at in our series on County Louth. There are other tales of the same kind about other cattle raids, about the death of King Conor McDonough. There's the comical story called the Tale of McDonough's Pig, a pig that was so large it needed a herd of 60 cows to feed it with milk. And my favourite, Mesca Ullad, about the warriors of Ulster who had to attend 2 feasts in one night, one in what is now Derry, the other in Dundalk, but they get so drunk at the first that they end up taking a wrong turn and ending up in Kerry. There are many poems of different kinds in this book, like the poems about Bridget and the Hill of Allen that we looked at in our series on County Kildare, and there's even a guide about the common mistakes that poets make and how to avoid them. Irish language poetry was incredibly complex at the time. There's even a very useful explainer about how the feasting hall in Tara was organised, who sat where and what portion of meat they got. A harpist got a pig's shoulder, the king got a tenderloin steak, and the king's jester got ribs. But what's really fascinating for me in this manuscript is its interest in places and times, and geography and history. There's a really important text in this manuscript known as Lever Gavala Éireann, the Book of the Invasions of Ireland. And it tells about a series of invasions, culminating in the arrival of the Gaelic people, the speakers of the Irish language. But those people have their roots in the same text traced back to biblical stories, so that the imagined past of the people of Ireland is interwoven with the scriptures. And the Irish language itself, for example, is said in this text to have been artificially constructed from all the languages that resulted from the fall of the Tower of Babel, making it the best of all languages. And there's a text called the Metrical Ginhenechus. Ginhenechus could be translated as place lore, and this version of place lore tells stories in poetic form about how places across Ireland got their names. Again though, the interest in geography is not limited to Ireland. There's a poem in Irish in this book that aims to educate its readers about world geography as it was known in 12th century Ireland. So what does this book tell us about the monks who wrote the book? Maybe in this very place, and those who read it here. It tells us that they were curious about their island and about their world. It tells us that they loved stories as much as we do. It tells us that they were unashamedly interested in reading beyond the scriptures, and that they wanted to read their native traditions in light of scripture and vice versa. And finally, it tells us something that marks out the Irish church at this time from most other places, that they valued their vernacular language, the Irish language, alongside Latin. Very few other parts of the church produced books with anything like this amount of vernacular material, but the Irish did so with great confidence and aplomb. And why wouldn't they, if their language was the best of all languages?